kitchen.
Cooking up something game-changing, generational, something down in the history books. Today we've got a legend, man.
It is. It's the first, isn't it?
Yeah.
Actually, there could be a few
We're really
firsts in
going.
here.
We're really going beyond football today.
Yeah.
Hashtag beyond football, man. But it's great to be back. When's the last podcast we done?
I don't know. It's been a minute.
2 or 3 months ago now.
Yeah.
So
A lot has happened.
you're bringing us back.
A lot has happened.
You're bringing us back with a bang. Today we've got ex-professional rugby player, intellect, Newcastle University graduate, ex-life after professional sports employee,
Author.
and yeah, okay.
Multiple book author.
And the guy when it comes to transitioning from sports, mainly primarily rugby. You know, if he hasn't hired me as a salesman already, then he needs to hire me.
He did
innit?
say he'll pay you later.
Get that commission.
Yeah, but Ben Mercer, welcome to the Beyond Football podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, man. You know, I know we connected through I think it was a Sports Pundit group chat, and she sent through the book Endgame, which I was so grateful for. But yeah, we love to start this podcast always talking about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and where it all begins, the why.
The why.
So, where did your professional sports career begin? Was it always a dream to become a professional rugby player?
I think like when I grew up around Bath, so we moved over from Bristol when I was about 7. And I tried a little bit of like mini rugby before, like in Bristol, and I enjoyed it, but not, wasn't super into it. But once I started school, and as soon as we played, I remember we played, we actually went back to Bristol, played at Bristol school, and I just loved it. It was a sunny day, running with the ball, with my new friends. I was absolutely just like besotted with it. And so just played school rugby up through till senior school. And then I suppose I started getting good when I was like 13 or 14. I think before that I'd been like a big kid, could just kind of run through people. But, like looking at my parents and I was like, I'm never going to be, that big, they're like just reasonable sized. Whereas obviously if you're going to be the big kid in rugby, you've got to be like real big unit.
Yeah.
So because I was fast, I started moving out into the backs and I was like looking at playing in the centre. Later I played a little on the wing. But yeah, I think when I was about 14, I got a letter from the academy at Bath. And Bath is like a kind of big historic rugby club. It was really successful in the 80s and the early 90s. And then kind of through to now, they're still pretty good. They're up there. They were in the final year just gone, but they've definitely had some lean times as well. But at the time, it was really exciting. I got this letter and I was like, oh, wow, yeah, definitely. So I think the dream of like professionalism sort of started then. And I think I was always just curious as to like how far I could go rather than I didn't have a sort of specific thing. It was almost that it sort of came to me and then I was curious. I enjoyed pushing myself. I liked being in the environment and also I was with some friends because I was going and playing at the kind of club version of Bath where anyone could turn up. But because of the prestige, like a lot of people wanted to be there and a few of us were kind of picked together and similar to any academy, you're just in a group and you're kind of growing up together, going through playing these other big teams. It was all exciting. So yeah, I think that was when it started, when I was about 13, 14.
That's so interesting because I guess I started my probably football journey when I was probably about 11. No, probably 8. And my actual academy journey at 11. I don't know about yourself, but I always grew up kind of watching football, watching all of these different sports, but obviously falling into football itself. Was that something that you kind of picked up from a really young age in terms of like aspiring? Like we used to watch World Cups, we used to watch Champions League finals. I'm not into rugby at all, and that you'll probably find that out throughout the podcast, but is that something that sparked for you, like role models or inspirational events and things like that?
Yeah, I was always like a multi-sport kid. So like my school wasn't a big football school, but we did play. And then I was one of those irritating kids who was pretty good at most things. I was terrible at cricket. Don't get me to play cricket. Another athlete, author guy, Azim Rafiq, asked me to play cricket in a charity match the other day. I was like, absolutely not. Get me out of there. But, football, tennis, I was a good swimmer. So I sort of did a GB standard time when I was like 11. So I sort of pursued that for a little bit. But the training was so boring that I just moved out to rugby. But yeah, I mean, growing up, we didn't have, we didn't have loads of sport on in the house. I remember my dad was like a big F1 guy. We'd put Wimbledon on. Didn't watch loads of football, but I got into it, probably about 10 or 11. Okay. But I think football, you're just on that accelerated pathway more so than rugby. I think rugby does depend a lot on your physique, like how that turns out. So people tend to sort of show their self when they're a teenager, when they start growing, whereas with football, I think there's an Arsene Wenger quote, which is like, if you don't have the kind of technique down by the time you're 11 or 12, like it's not happening for you, Where there's loads of rugby guys, a friend of mine was a GB rower until he was 22, 23. He realized he wasn't going to get into the senior team, but, the guy was 6'7", huge, incredibly fit. And so he went and did a master's at uni and converted to rugby, and he ended up having like a pretty decent rugby career, So rugby can take like a kind of a late converter like that if you've got the physique and you can add some ball skills and some understanding. But I think with football, because the competition is so fierce, it's literally global. You got to get that technique down early, and if you don't have it, like it's you're not going to suddenly add it when you're 18. It's difficult to learn those skills by then. So I think by and large, it's sort of over for you at that point. Is my understanding.
No, that's really interesting, because it's like, so you're basically saying that rugby allows you to specialize later compared to obviously football, where the statistics say that in the Euro squad, or I think the latest under 21 like England team, all the players who actually play in the team were in an academy before the age of under nines.
Yeah.
So it's like Arsene Wenger is saying, like, if you're not in that academy, then there's no chance of playing at that elite level. And the statistics saying that the youngest players who are the most expensive, Jamal Musiala, Jude Bellingham, Garnacho, all of them were in their academies before that age. But it's nice to hear, obviously, you have a different sport and you being able to obviously enjoy dancing across all these different sports and then finally specialising and actually can make a career out of it,
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I guess, how do you feel like that early specialisation has a different effect? Do you think it had any type of different effect? Because we always speak about that early specialisation from football and how maybe further down the line it had a bit of an effect.
What sort of effect?
I don't know. I guess you started rugby, what you said, probably properly when you're 14. If we're probably saying if you're starting football at 14, there's a very slim chance that you're going to make it elite.
If you're starting, when you mean by starting, what do you mean by that? Like,
I think I suppose when I was about 13, I went and joined like the Bath club, and
team.
from there got selected.
It's your first time actually playing the team sport.
Yeah, well, I played for school. So school, we played, we had rugby, then like hockey and football, and then later, like in the summer, it was sort of tennis, athletics, cricket. So, my year was kind of rugby, football and hockey, and then later into like, the athletics and the tennis. So I had a bit of a spread of stuff, and like with swimming as well. But I think, with rugby, I suppose because I was good, because I was big, I didn't, bother with like ball skills in a way when I was young, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, at an age where actually it's super crucial if you're a footballer. You actually are, getting those techniques down. Whereas like, it would have definitely benefited my rugby to be like handling the ball more, but at break time we tended to play football at that point. So we were like playing football at, going down to the
I've never seen anyone play rugby at break time. Imagine someone else, let's go play rugby.
But
like, that's crazy.
You go to like New Zealand, South Africa, big rugby nations, those kids are playing touch rugby at break time, right? So they're going out and running around and, like no contact probably.
That has a massive effect then on obviously the amount of players that go and actually...
Yeah, exactly.
That's so interesting, because I guess people talk about like cage football
Yeah,
know,
that's
it's
yeah,
so
yeah.
easy to just go. And,
Yeah.
That's
and,
where the best
and,
players are made.
and start a game of football. So it's that I call it lazy technique, where it's just second nature because you've played it so many times. People
Yeah.
talk about 10,000 hour rules. You're getting in your hours to actually be able to become elite. So it's so interesting.
But
I think so. Just to cut in on you, that's a barrier to entry, isn't it? So
Yeah.
rugby has quite a high barrier to entry because to have a
Yeah.
decent game, even of touch, you probably need like 5 aside, maybe 7 aside for it to be like actually good.
Yeah.
Whereas you go and play basketball, you can play 1-on-1, and you can go. There's like a hoop, it's something you can just walk on and go and do.
Yeah.
Football, similarly, you can go down, you can play in the park, you can go to a cage. There's all these different places, playground. It's sort of an easier thing to do, whereas I think rugby just does have like a higher barrier to entry than like maybe those two sports in particular.
Yeah. I feel like what I said earlier, I kind of beg to differ in terms of the late specialization thing, because we're seeing recently a lot of the opposite in terms of late specializers doing really well in football,
Oh yeah,
especially in the non-league system, and obviously a lot of players who come through that brutal, rigorous non-league system, they then go on to have more successful careers than someone who's been at the under-9 level. And it's something that we discussed with obviously Chris Robinson on a podcast where he said that route is obviously really good, builds that robustness. But then looking back on it, I feel like it's always better to specialize later to an extent. Because for me, I don't think if I specialize later that I would be as good as I am today. Because I wouldn't have that. Some sports require you to have that technical skill where you can't learn when your body's like fully grown, your body moves a certain way. Like for example, goalkeeping. I always talk about Chelsea helped me develop those techniques, that how I move around the goal, my footwork, my body positioning, my handling shape. These are things that it's very hard to teach someone at like maybe an older age.
Yeah.
No, there's so many things on that. So I think the early specialization thing, I almost maybe don't mean it in terms of being in the academy setup. It's probably, I suspect the guys who are talking about, they've probably always played football, but then maybe they've just been outside those environments. I mean, I'm an Arsenal fan, and this is an old, kind of an older example, but Ian Wright, he got picked up in his early 20s. He wasn't a pro until later, was he? And there was someone who was like, he was clearly always playing. And you already touched on the 10,000 hours rule, which is a sort of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, I think it is.
Practice.
And that's an idea popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers.
And it's in Mastery. And it's also in...
Not Bounce.
It's in Bounce,
I think it's mentioned in Bounce.
It's massive in Bounce,
And the example they kick off with is Tiger Woods, right? And that's a closed skill, I think, is the definition of it. Whereas there's another book called Range by David Epstein, and he contrasts 10,000 hours Tiger Woods.
No, we have to cut the podcast. We've got to cut it, man. We can't leak the range.
David Epstein.
Can't leak the range. He's leaked. I'm gonna have to edit that out, man.
All right, sorry, man.
It's a game changer. People don't read nowadays. People don't read nowadays.
Bro, he's just leaked the book, bro. That's all our secrets, man. You're not gonna watch us anymore.
I'm sorry.
No.
It's good. Range.
Yeah.
Go get it if you want.
It's a top tier.
It's a top tier.
It's
go
such a
ahead.
good guy.
And they obviously use Roger Federer, and a late specializer, always playing tennis, playing football, playing all these games, all these sports with his mates. His mum was a tennis coach, and he still didn't specialize properly until he was 16, 17. He's obviously gone on to be, he's my favorite. He's my goat,
Roger.
But I mean, that's the counterexample, isn't it? So I think like all these routes are possible, and I think you're right. Like to have that kind of multiplicity of experience is probably really beneficial for and particularly for a young athlete. So for me, if I was parenting a sporty kid, I would, as far as possible, probably try and like keep them as broad as they'd like to be, rather than like funnel them down a track. But,
and I think it's very interesting because I was just analysing this and obviously looking at different industries that do things like this. And it's like football, they make you specialise directly. Obviously football training, football. But in other industries, they allow you to gather that breadth So it builds you into the more robust. The main example that I like is the education system. So the people who go on to be at the best unis are the people with the most range, in terms of they studied the most GCSEs. They studied the most GCSEs.
Yeah.
They have like, normally people get like around 8 to 9, right?
Yeah.
But those ones who go on to do like A levels, they get like maybe like 10 to 12 GCSEs, more subjects, more range. And then they introduce something called the IB, the International Baccalaureate.
Yeah.
If you're doing the IB, it allows you to be exposed to a higher level of education and range than anyone who's just doing simple A levels or B techs. So then people who go to do IB, they're the ones who then go to your Cambridges, your Russell Group universities, because they've gathered that range.
Right.
And whenever I speak to people from Oxford and that, they're on a different level in terms of the way they can dance across disciplines. Like, whenever I speak to them, they can do everything. I know someone who went to, uni of UCL, Oxford. They can make content on TikTok. They can study medicine. They're good at sports. They're doing this. They're doing that. I know a guy. I need to shout him up. His name is FaZe the First on TikTok. One of my guys. He literally recently just graduated from chemical engineering from the University of Cambridge. He just studied his master's, the same age as me. But he has range. He studied chemical engineering at Cambridge, runs his own tutoring business. He's a certified power lifter. He mentors young people. He does all these different things. And I'm just like, creates content. It's like, they're like superhumans, but it's because he's done all these different things for so many different years. So
I think as well, you know, like, and it'd be interesting, you might know, you might have asked him, but I think things like powerlifting, sport generally, they're amazing. Like, they teach you these meta skills that actually are then, they translate to these other disciplines. So it's like, okay, you know, powerlifting is about like rigor, planning, you know, execution. It's about technique. It's about efficiency, actually, with your training, with your time, with your nutrition. So it's like, these are little meta disciplines. I think a lot of athletes probably don't realize like how valuable those things are if you can take them and, like you say, transpose them to academics, to business. You know, it doesn't need to be chemical engineering. It could be, it could be like, you know, running a small business. It could be, you know, running a team within a business. It could be doing any of these things. And actually, he probably has kind of internalized these little systems for himself. And he's super efficient with his like effort. It's
so interesting because I guess you're talking about a range and having breadth, but to understand that you're valuable in other domains, you need to be exposed to them. So what you're talking about, early specialization, is footballers probably have the skills, but they're just not exposed to apply them in different domains. So myself and Daniel, we can talk about the different experiences that we've had, or like yourself when you're younger, but all we're doing is applying those systems, like you said, in different domains because we're exposed to them. So the more exposure you have, the more value you can see yourself applying to these other things. And then you become more than a footballer. You become beyond football because, yes, you're good at football, but the skills that you have in football, you can apply to all of these other disciplines as well. You know, and I think it's more so about exposing people to use the skills that they have and taken from football and show that they're valuable in all these other things in the world. So
I think as well, sport, it can open the doors to these things. So it's like, you know, your team's got sponsors, your team might have like a kind of personal development representative. You maybe move to another country, you know, and like you guys should speak to my friend Zach Henry. He's a rugby player. He came up at university. He wasn't a kind of heralded young guy at all. You know, I'm not sure he even really played academy rugby anywhere. Came up at Bath Uni, came to France. Like, you know, the coach kind of, I think, thought that he'd be like a guy to fill out the squad more than anything else. But he really kicked on, progressed. He went up through the divisions, came back to England. That like went okay, and he's gone back to France. He's at one of the best teams. He's at Stade Francais in Paris, but he's studying on the side as well. So he's doing a psychology master's, I think. But you know, one of the things I thought about France was like, I'd always wanted to live in France, but obviously I got to learn French, and that was an opportunity that I got through sport. They gave us lessons in at the team. I committed to them, you know, and then it was, you'd almost go and speak to the French lads and be like, no, we're going to speak French. We're not going to, you know, muddle through in English. And actually, sport can give you these opportunities. Football, obviously, global game. And I think, you know, some of these guys who have moved around all these countries, they suddenly speak 5 languages. And you're just like, well, normal people don't get that. You know, most people don't move around and have those like multicultural experiences. So like even that, keeping your mind open to like to those experiences, those opportunities is like so powerful and important, I think.
That's so good.
I think it stems nicely to what we were speaking about before in obviously the coffee shop about your dissertation.
Yeah.
And what we said about football is not a career, it's an opportunity. So, and the problem is footballers or sports people are not leveraging the opportunity to the fullest extent. You have an opportunity right now to be a role model, to be a protagonist in society, that people look up to you and want to have a bite, a slice of what you have to offer. But they don't actually understand the true value. They obviously see that it has value, but they don't actually understand that, wow, we're holding a gold mine here.
Yeah.
I love how you frame that. I think it's an opportunity, not a career. And I think it is an opportunity for a career in football, but you're exactly right. It's an opportunity for all these other routes, all these other advancements, whether those are for you or for other people. And I think one of my kind of failures when I was playing rugby was that, and I think the environment was different and people and teams were a bit more suspicious of like extracurricular activity then.
Still
I think
stigma.
I think there's still a bit of that, but I think the environment has changed. I think you can see that with the very top level people, and we'll maybe come on some like examples, but I think when I think now, I talk about books a lot, and I didn't like sort of social media beforehand when I was playing rugby for, you know, a variety of reasons. But actually it was a failure of imagination. I had an opportunity to be an athlete and talk about books. And I kind of let that go by. And actually, you know, that kind of counts for anybody pursuing a sport, because you have an opportunity to open up, you know, the perception of other people to what an athlete can be and can do by talking about the other things you're interested in. It can be anything, you know, and I think that's like your framing of it as an opportunity is so powerful. I think that's like a really, really useful thing for people to take hold of.
It's massive, because I'm always big on why aren't people taking these opportunities? You know, it's very great to talk about, and it's probably us, we have taken it. But 2 things come to my mind is people operate at the level of their wisdom. If they don't see it as an opportunity, how can they take it as an opportunity? So I think podcasts like this, people like yourself that are really championing doing something alongside, and the opportunities that are present to footballers need to be amplified so much more. You know, it needs to be like something's hidden in the corner, needs to be thrusted into the limelight. The fact that there's so many opportunities for players to develop and grow and use their, what do you call it,
meta skills
in all of these different disciplines, in investment banking, in marketing. There's so much money to be made, but so much impact that can be made, because athletes they just have the whole tool set to just be elite in whatever they want to be elite in. But then me and Dan talk about it all the time, because it's actually being voiced a lot more. So why aren't players taking the opportunities to do it? I know Dan's thought on it. Obviously, around my dissertation with my master's at the moment, I'm looking at the play, like who's responsible for it. But I think it's so interesting that, is it not there in the limelight, or are players not connecting with the opportunities that are there? And why?
That's difficult, isn't it? I think because there are people I find really inspiring competing now, people like Jaylen Brown in the NBA. You know, the guy's basically a sort of a genius. He made a college choice that was predicated around academics rather than athletics. He still made it to the NBA. He runs a streetwear brand. He does technology masterclasses for kids. Yeah, you should get him in here. Yeah. He until his mate stumped him. Jason Tatum, he signed the biggest contract in
yeah.
NBA history. So
Wow,
this
wow,
guy's, he's doing it all,
elite.
right? But I think when you are at that elite level, maybe other doors, they are easier to push open. I think it's a really difficult one because I think there's definitely a system issue, right?
Yeah.
That, to your point, people aren't seeing the possibilities for themselves. Maybe they're seeing them at that top level.
Yeah.
They're not being encouraged. They're not seeing them for themselves. I equate it to health. You know, my parents were doctors. I grew up kind of observing that. I did little bits of work in the practice my mum worked in Bristol.
Yeah.
And you just see, you know, if it's difficult, people find it difficult to stay healthy, right? The environment does not make it simple for them to stay healthy.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of work. But the problem is, at the minute, the responsibility falls on the individual. But if you just complain about that and don't do anything, you're the person that suffers. You know, the system doesn't suffer.
Yeah.
That's it.
So unfortunately,
System doesn't suffer.
if the system is not working to your benefit,
Reanalyze, re-strategize.
you're the one. You're going to have to take it by the horns for the moment. And, you know, people like yourselves, like, you know, pushing the issue, that's going to help loads. But, you know, for the moment, you can't bemoan the state of affairs because you're the only person that's going to be hurt.
Yeah.
It's the cost of living crisis. You can't now say the government's bad and not do anything about it. The system is rigged. You can't now blame the government saying my life chances, my opportunity, my career, my finances, my family is not going the way I wanted to because I'm going through a cost of living that the government caused and the system has an issue.
So interesting.
So I think that highlights my standpoint in terms of the question, which I never used to have. I used to have, you know, a lot of what's the right word to use? A lot of thing towards the system, a lot of anger, a lot of spite, resentment towards the system. But then, you know, the older I've got, and obviously being in different environments and experiences, speaking to new people, I've realized that, you know, I think the system's amazing.
Yeah.
I think the system is amazing and what they provide and what a lot of colleges or industries or companies or clubs do for young players and what they do to their lives is amazing in terms of the range that they can provide them with, the support that the PFA gives to them, the Premier League, international tournaments, access to education funding. I think it's a dream. It's living a dream. But players are too spoilt to take full advantage of the opportunity. Too spoiled.
I think it's not, you know, things can always improve. You know, sport is predicated on improvement. It's a constant search for improvement, right? And the system can always improve. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
There's definitely failings. People could do better. But you're right. The opportunities, the support, the possibilities are greater than 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You know, there are conversations around mental health. There are people that care about the problem. You know, no one cared before. It was like, well, you know, be grateful, see you later. But you're right. There's so many possible routes and people are willing to help while you're competing. And not only that, but you probably have quite a lot of time.
Yeah.
Athletes normally have a lot of downtime, and whether, you know, that's travel, you know, you might be traveling, you might be staying in hotels, you know, it's not perfect. I know you are supposed to be like physically resting and stuff, but you do have time to pursue some of these other possibilities. And there will be someone who will probably help you out, but you do have to do that yourself. And I think that's fair because there are other people for whom those possibilities aren't available. And while you're an athlete, you are kind of disproportionately interesting to everybody else, right? Like, even if you're not,
that's right.
You know, even if you're not at that very top level, people find you compelling. They find your story and your journey and where you want to go. People find those things compelling and appealing. And they probably won't when you're not doing them. Yeah. So it's like you need to do it. You need to seize the day, right?
Seize the day.
What Toby
I
always
say it
says.
all the time. I said, whatever you do, it carries 10 times its weight in gold as an athlete. you know. So if you're not utilizing that, once you're done, it's like you're forgotten about. Someone said you're a long time retired.
No one cares about you.
Yeah,
Wayne Rooney, who's that?
Yeah, I know.
I was in school, at the school. People were like, what? Who's that?
Yeah.
I was like, what?
You're
No,
like,
Wayne
joking.
Rooney.
It's the same way when people say like Ronaldinho, like obviously I know, but I don't actually know
Yeah.
Pele, all these guys, Ronaldo, Maradona.
There was a rugby guy who was saying, you know, he was a bit of a club legend, Leicester Tigers. He retired, came back to like maybe go to a game the next year, and someone was sat in his seat, someone's wearing his number. You know, you're gone. And that's how it is. Like, you know, the world moves on, the team moves on, you know, they need someone else steps up. 100%. That's what it is. And I mean, even those guys, that's incredible, isn't it? Like Wayne Rooney, Ronaldinho, they were like the
Even
iconic
Ronaldo
players.
and Messi,
Yeah.
they're dying out.
Yeah.
Now it's Jude Bellingham.
Yeah, it's different guys.
But it's not just football and rugby. I started to
life.
listen to an athletics podcast with Asafa Powell and Justin Gatlin. Like people of my generation, these guys are legends. I don't even know. Do you know these men?
Who?
Asafa Powell.
Who the
Justin,
heck is that?
Justin Gatlin.
They were the fastest men in the world at one point. Yeah.
They had a joint world record.
Asafa Powell?
9.77.
I've never heard that name.
Are
in
you
my
kidding?
life.
Pre-Bolt.
Yeah, pre-Bolt. It was
I've
pre-Bolt.
never in my life heard that name.
Asafa Powell made a way for Bolt.
What country is he from? Jamaica.
Yeah. Bro,
Who's the other person?
Justin Gatlin.
Never in my life I've heard that name.
See, but they're legends, bro, and they were at the top of their game in athletics. They always say athletics is what have you done for me lately? That's sports, you know.
NFL, not for long.
Not for not for long.
Not for long.
But that's how
top tier.
But that's how we have to start embodying the quote that I told you, which you've just used. That
What I use?
that
I told you, we need to employ a trademark guy, man. That just as soon as we write, everything that comes on the podcast needs to be trademarked straight
Yeah,
away.
it does.
There needs to be an AI for that.
but
You can have all this, but
Yeah.
a bit of commission.
but embody and live out the reality of sports. Let's not live in a fantasy. We understand it's a dream to really get to the top. Many get to do it, but they still live in the reality of sport. They're an injury away. You know, they're not getting a contract away from their career ending. So it's only ever an opportunity and not a career. And when we start to live that out, we can actually play football for what it is, which is an opportunity. And if we get to play it for 30 years, fantastic. If we get to build a life of it, fantastic. But always knowing in the back of our mind that it's only ever an opportunity, because there's so many people dropping out the game. I don't know the statistics of players that don't get a contract every season. You know, I think someone said to me 500 players get released, maybe more than that, through academy systems as well. So it's like, what are they going to do? If they're built it up as a career and they don't get a contract at 19, what do? You know, because they think they're playing till 35. So if they haven't prepared for it, it's where does it fall? And if they're not taking responsibility for it, where does it fall? You know? And I guess we're probably people that just care. You know, I said to Daniel earlier, I said, I will just try and tell you the truth, hopefully so you can have a great life. Not just a great life as an athlete, but a great life as a life. If that involves sport, fantastic. If it doesn't, still have a great life. You know, and that's what we should be working towards. Not just a great athletic life, but a great life overall. That has to be the goal.
I came across this guy in my old role at Laps, and he was a pro cricketer. And I think he was pretty good. He played county cricket. You know, he's a full-time pro. I think at a certain point, maybe in his mid-20s, he kind of maybe gotten hurt. I can't quite remember the specifics, but he fell out of cricket. Yeah. He had all the kind of standard athlete problems that they encounter when they hit retirement. Yeah. Financial insecurity. What do I do? Loss of identity. And he had an interest in like physical conditioning. He got his PT qualifications. He ended up opening an F45 gym. So he became a franchisee. Opened his own business. He was really enjoying that. He was doing it. You know, I think he was doing it for maybe 18 months, 2 years. He developed all these competencies that he didn't realize he had with, you know, running a business, training people, you know, that kind of day-to-day, like normal work, I suppose. And then I think he got a phone call that maybe the team had an injury or a different team had a vacancy, and his agent suddenly got in touch and was like, oh, you know, how you doing? Are you still fit? Are you training? You know, how about cricket? Do you fancy it? And he went back to cricket.
Class.
But he still had his business on the side. And actually he said that not only did he enjoy the cricket a lot more, because he'd proven to himself that he could exist without cricket.
Yeah.
But actually, he played better. I think he even appeared for England one time after, which he hadn't done before. You know, and that weight, those insecurities about life beyond sport, had been like lifted from him, and that was such an interesting, powerful example for me, because it was like, oh wow, you know, it was forced upon him. But he still went and did it. And then actually the performance benefit of having something outside of sport that he wasn't just, you know, he wasn't just watching TV, but he wasn't also, he wasn't just learning, you know, he was implementing, he was acting. Like you said, the word you used earlier, he was a protagonist in the world beyond sport. And that gave his sport like increased power. You know, he was better in that sporting environment because he'd like learned beyond it. I found that one really interesting.
Good.
A wise man called Neil Clark. He talks about it perfectly in terms of that concept. He's currently studying, I think it's his PhD on it. And he spoke about it being a secure base beyond football. And when he actually explained that concept to me, it was really enlightening, because obviously I study psychology and we do a lot about attachment and the impact of attachment type on your life. They could talk about the continuity hypothesis, which is the idea that your attachment type in childhood continues on to your attachment type in adulthood. So if you're insecurely attached to the people around you when you're a young adolescent, that's how you are going to be when you're older. Your interaction and intimacy, your separation anxiety, all these different things. That's how your attachment type's going to be. But I think the main primary thing that impacts that is whether or not you have a secure base throughout your childhood and your life. A lot of people who come out and become murderers or criminals or antisocial behavior in society is because they've never had that secure base. They've experienced ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, when they're younger, whether it's trauma, whether it's going through divorce, whether it's, you know, difficult childhoods where they're not able to develop that secure base and attachment type. And now they have to displace that behavior in a certain way. Or they haven't had the right role models. So in football, being a beyond footballer, or in sport, going beyond sports, that cricketer, it allows you to have that secure base. So then now you can go into your sport and actually be that whole person, come out of it. Your secure base is something that allows you to feel rejuvenated, allows you to refresh, recover, and then go back out into the world.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm going to have to credit him, and I really don't want to. I'd love to credit this one.
That's what I do.
You know,
That's how you credit someone. Right? You learn it.
Great artist steal. Great artist steal. Yeah.
Hey, the way he done it was so passionate. He was like, I have to.
I'm gonna have to.
So a friend of mine, Dr. Chris McCready, a guy I met again. from
top guy.
Yeah. So he was, he had a player care role at Man United.
Yeah.
He's now at UK Sport, but he had this metaphor that I stole from my book Endgame, where it's so your identity. He does this exercise with young players where they have to build a stool.
Table. Yeah, I see that one.
Table with one leg is super insecure. If that one leg is your athletic identity, your identity is pretty precarious. But if your identity, like you're saying, you build a secure base, you have separate identities as like your other roles in your life, and those are secure, then actually you can take away one of those legs at any point, and while you'll wobble, you'll stay standing. But if your entire identity, and I know with football, because of the economic engine that it is and the possibilities, sometimes even a family, like whole family's hopes might be geared towards one kid's professional success, right? And so, you know, if that's taken away, then not only is that kid left bereft, but maybe their whole family is left, in a precarious situation. And so, you want to spread your bets. You want to build the other legs of your table. Yeah. So,
It's amazing. It's amazing that you touch on that. And obviously, you've come from a different sporting background to us, and probably a lot of people listen to the podcast. So when you talk about those different bases, is it similar? Is football similar to rugby in terms of a lot of rugby players are building everything on rugby, or do they actually have a identity beyond rugby? I guess.
No, I think it's similar. And like rugby, because of the size you need to be, it used to be that, you know, maybe you wouldn't start playing professionally properly and be in the team until you're, 20, in your early 20s. But because the system's now better at preparing people for like the physical rigors, actually quite often you'll see an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, those things used to be quite rare in rugby. And people used to have a little bit more of their early adulthood to maybe explore something else. But I think now, people are more aware to it. People are studying on the side, doing these other things, but it's still pretty much like people are turning up to training, doing it, going home, resting up. A lot of people, they don't want to think beyond rugby. Yeah. It is pretty similar to football. And I think there's a quote, because it's almost like you're thinking about your death. The end of your career is like your...
Yeah, a lot of people say that. It's not good to have a second plan B, because plan B means you're not focused on your plan A.
Exactly. And I think rugby, there is that mentality also exists, like football.
It's quite interesting.
I think it's so interesting. I think it's one of those dilemmas or things that is normal to society, but is actually not true. In terms of in life, they say that you can't do two things exceptionally right or good. That if like the most successful people focused on one thing and then went out in different things after that. But I think I really disagree on that. I think you could be successful in more than one thing at the same time, in terms of, because that's what beyond football is. We spoke about Simeon, who said to be at the highest level, or the ideal situation for a footballer is to have the delusion that they can make it to the highest level, but also understand that they can't and do other things alongside it. And I think in terms of my life and how I see it, I don't think I could only do one thing. Like I strive to be excellent in multiple things. And I think that's what range is about.
Yeah.
In terms of you need to do all these things exceptionally, and then, you can then obviously specialize later on.
Yeah. But that's where I'm always saying it's great that we're here. How do we embed this? Because I said range should be something that's taught alongside how to do kick-ups. It has to be.
We're giving away all this stuff, man. No, stop.
It has to be, because if it's only ever an opportunity, the minute you enter into that opportunity, you should be preparing for the end, because you never know when that's going to be. So if you're not preparing somebody with range, are you not just setting them up for potential failure?
And that's where it's interesting when you say where does the responsibility lies. Oh, we need to take notes. This is a dissertation. Because, bro, that's the truth. Because now in your thing, you can then, this is discussion, in your discussion section.
You guys are just writing for me, man. Come on.
Because it's like, now, before I was like, no, it's like the player. But when you talk like that, it's now a duty of care, innit? To an extent, because they know what they're getting to an extent, innit?
But do they know? Because
then we
talk about systems.
True.
Because the goal of a system, what's success for the rugby system and what's success for the football system is probably different to what's success for an athlete like Ben and is success for an athlete like me.
True.
I think rugby will, at the minute, the highest someone is being paid is probably £1 million a year. So obviously that's loads of money.
Yeah.
But it's not generational wealth, right? Yeah. And football has that carrot that everyone can kind of believe in a little bit. It is dangled there for everybody. I think what was interesting, I went and did a few workshops with Chris at Man United, and what was super interesting was the difference. I think they were only a year different between the under-16s, the kind of GCSE age guys, and the under-18s, under-17s. Yeah. And the under-16s were like football. They were fully focused on it. Yeah. They didn't even really want to like brook discussion beyond it. Particularly, they were like, no, I need to focus on this. Yeah. Whereas the guys, they're only 1 year older, were super open to other things. Super open to it. They were really, really impressive group of young men, really. Yeah. And when I was thinking about it, and I don't, this is just my theory, but I think those guys are a few of them had been bought and sold multiple times by the age of 17, right? And in football, that's normal.
Yeah.
Rugby, less so. You're still kind of probably just attached to whichever team you've grown up near.
Yeah.
There was one guy, he'd been bought and sold 3 times.
At 17.
Yeah. So I think those guys were much more aware of their status as a commodity, and then were therefore prepared to think about something beyond succeeding at Manchester United. Whereas I think maybe the other guys had like less of that happen to them, and so they had the carrot, that carrot was still all they could think about. But it was wild to me because it was just 1 year difference, and the mentality was quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that's so interesting. 2 questions there then. One, in rugby, do rugby players feel commodified in terms of the system? And then 2, is there a problem with the system commodifying us?
There's no problem. It's a business, when you get into it.
Do we know though? Because
I think obviously younger players from like the age of, I think that's why I'm saying what would be interesting to see the research in terms of what age players realise the realities of football. Because a lot of players, obviously, we all go into it because we enjoy it in the academy system. Obviously, if you're at Chelsea from under 9s, you know that this is serious. You're training like every day, multiple times a week, missing school sometimes. But at what age do they really... I think it's probably under... For me, it was probably under... When I was a scholar at West Ham, when you start getting paid and stuff, that's when you understand, okay, cool, this is serious now.
I think in rugby you're not being paid at such a young age, and also you're very rarely actually being bought and sold. So people tend to move at the end of their contract. And I think with football, obviously, there's, transfer window, people are being bought and sold for sums of money. And also at that youth level, you're still being bought and sold for sums of money. So I think that is just more advanced. Football is way further down the line. It's a much bigger enterprise than rugby. But I think the other side of it is, again, it sort of comes back a bit to that personal responsibility is statistic I use in Endgame, which I really like because I think it explains a lot of how people behave. I think it's something like 85% of people believe they're a better than average driver. So it's like, that just doesn't make sense, right? Because obviously, you're going to be like, everyone's going to be on that 0 to 100, but 85% of people believe, no, I'm better than 50%, And actually, I think it's similar with the young athlete. You're like, well,
I can make it.
Yeah, I'll do it. I know this. Someone might say these are the statistics, and you're like, "That's not me, though."
It's like gambling.
I'm going. Yeah, exactly.
Gambling.
Yeah, and people love it. People do it all the time. There are a few winners in that.
Football is gambling.
That's so interesting. But if you're in a system and you want to play football and that's your dream, you're gonna back. Like you don't. If you got a teammate that doesn't think that we're gonna win the game, then why would you get involved in it in the first place?
I agree. And I said to the Man United guys, I was like, who here thinks they should focus on their football? And they don't want to look bad in front of their coach either. So, pretty much all of them put their hand up.
And all that pressure as well.
Yeah. But I said to them, I was like, and you should. I was like, you should focus on it.
Yeah.
Because you've got an opportunity. You've got this carrot. You've got this, incredible possibility for yourself that other people don't get. But actually, for you to even be sat here proves that you're extraordinary.
Of course.
And you should try and express your extraordinary nature in another domain in case this doesn't work out. Of course, you should focus on your sport at that age. Of course you should. But also, if you don't keep an eye on the rest of your life, that's kind of on you a little bit. And that's harsh, but it's a harsh environment.
It is on you. It is on you. And I feel like we need to... I am going to be more strict and harsher on players because I know the consequences and they need more tough love in terms of it is on you. And if you don't do anything about it, you're going to be finished. It's as simple as that. And I'm not even sugarcoating anything anymore in terms of on this podcast and my standpoint on it. If you do not do anything and you're currently a player right now in the academy or at any level of the football pyramid, or you don't do anything beyond your football, you're putting yourself in a seriously disadvantaged position. So you need to wake up and do something. It's as simple as that. And it's on you. If you finish your career and you have nothing to transition into and you have no income after your contract is finished, it is on you.
Drop the mic. That's it. That's done.
Simple.
Conclusion.
Yeah,
Write that one down.
Simple. It's a tough reality of the world.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to accept it. For a lot of time, I didn't want to accept it. You know, that resentment, that bitterness, saying, oh, the keeper coach brought in his own goalkeeper.
Yeah.
Didn't get the opportunity. I went a whole season without playing one game. Like, nah, it's their fault. They didn't give me the chance. It's on me.
But I guess people always say control the controllables. And I think we're probably getting to the realization that being an elite athlete, our sport is so not in our hands most of the time. And I think sometimes we think it is. So when you speak about the Manchester United players, they're probably saying, I can control my destiny in football. And oftentimes that doesn't play out like that. And I think it's just probably living in that reality to say, if this isn't in full control, I need to at least have something else just in case, you know. And I think it's a hard one to balance for, I guess as we're getting older, it's like, it's a no-brainer, you know. But why isn't it a no-brainer to everyone? And I keep saying it's great that we're sitting here, but how do we get the message across to the younger players? So it's such an interesting one. Such an interesting.
I think, yeah, the controllables thing is nice as well. And I think like when you think about what people could think about is like, what are you doing at sport? So it's like, you know, you've got a goal, you're making consistent effort, you've got a plan, you've got a schedule, you've got these things. And it's like, how can you take those exact structures, those exact kind of mindsets and apply them just over here in another endeavor? Like you said, get that range for yourself, because you've got the kind of tools to actually make success of something else. And whether that's studying, whether that's growing social media account, you know, building your personal profile, whether that's just like, you know, maybe starting a business, like all these other things, they're all available to you, and you have those mindsets and tools from football or, you know, whatever your sport is. Like, they do exist. Like, you've already developed them. So it's like, well, go and exercise them somewhere else. And like I said, it doesn't need to be, I think the other thing is it doesn't need to be a huge effort. It's like a bit like with fitness, when, you know, people say things like do 10 press ups a day, and people are like, that's not very much though. And it's like, well, it's better, 10's more than 0. So it's like, go and read a book 10 minutes a day. It's better than 0 minutes, you know? And it sounds silly and it sounds obvious, but it isn't. And actually that's how you build a habit. You know, if you read Atomic Habits, exactly.
Habit stacking.
Exactly. And it's like, you know,
we sound like readers.
I know, bro.
You are. You've read a lot.
So many books.
We dropped too many gems.
6,
though.
7 books already.
It's good.
Yeah,
you know?
no,
that's why these things are there. They're like stores of knowledge, right?
Yeah. That's cool.
I know we've highlighted obviously how much of an intellect and author and obviously articulate side of you, but we haven't really gone into the rugby side of you and obviously how good you actually were. You know? a lot of players see Turby.
Oh, it's brilliant. Don't.
Just fantastic.
A lot of players see Turby here and you're like, he plays professional football, but they actually don't know he can't score.
I'm still here.
But yeah, like what actual level did you play at, and you know, what quality, what standard, and what rigor did it take?
So, like I said, I was in a Premiership rugby academy. So I suppose the similar thing with
Premier
football would
League,
be like being a Premier League academy. Then I went to university and I was attached to the Premiership team up there, but I was also playing uni rugby, which is like much lower level, and then also playing like local club rugby, which was great because actually it was guys, you know, young guys wanting to prove themselves. It was old guys on their way down, and then it was also maybe guys who had just like had jobs, lived in the area, were good rugby players. So that was probably like 3rd division, I suppose. So, and then when I turned pro, that was Championship. So that was the level below the Premiership. And then I never actually got back up to that Premiership standard. So age grade, I got selected England students. So I was always kind of trialing for those England teams, but I got hurt at the wrong time. And I never got a cap at that junior level, which was a shame. But yeah, I think I never kind of got back up to that top club level. I was always the level below. And then when we went to France, we were actually a level lower, and some wealthy guys had taken over a team, and they were they wanted, you know, had a big vision to advance this team up the league. So that's what we were sort of building there. I spent 4 years playing rugby in France, and yeah, that was super fun. And that's the sort of topic of my first book, Fringes, is those 4 years set in France, like give the kind of the narrative its kind of heft, I suppose, and then I use it to sort of jump off and, you know, pontificate on other things I think about rugby basically and sport. But yeah, so that was where I was. I feel like I didn't quite, you know, fulfill maybe my possibility, my potential in rugby, but you know, there's loads of athletes who that happens to. Yeah. And I think when you look at rugby, and I explain it in the first book, is like there's probably like 80%, 90% of guys who are all pretty good, who with the right bit of luck, or you know, they hit a rich vein of form, or if they have one person believe in them, then could go to that top level. And there's probably a band of guys who are just better, like obviously. So whether that's technique wise, whether it's their physique, maybe they're really big, maybe they're really fast, maybe they're both, you know, like, or some guys, you know, they have that combination where you're just like, okay, they're just like an all round brilliant player. But I think those are sort of the possibilities within the sport, I think. And like I said, you could just be like a big athlete and not that great like around the park and still make a professional career. Like, you know, not that great with the ball. I mean, you could just be a kind of high class grafter, you know, tackling, you know, doing the kind of
John Terry.
Yeah, well, doing the like physical work, I suppose. Or you could, you know, you could be a scorer. You could be someone who's maybe not the most skilled with the ball, but you're really fast. You can beat a man one-on-one and you're stood on the wing. But I think, you know, there is a band of people who are just better. And I think you just end up having to respect that.
That's fair play. That's good.
Yeah, well, the question I had was like, see those 4 years that helped you write Fringes. I was wondering like, why did you write Fringes? Like, what was that for? What was the purpose behind that? And then I wanted to ask as well. You said you don't know if you felt like you reached your potential in rugby, and I was like, how did you deal with that? And at what point did you call it quits?
Yeah, I'll start with that. I think there was a point where I had a move fall through in my like kind of when I was about 24, 25. And suddenly I was just sat there without a deal. And I found that really difficult because that was the first time in my life I didn't have anything to do. You know, I'd always been busy. I'd always had sport. I had my schoolwork, my sport, my uni work, you know, my sport, you know, then a professional deal. Then I was doing small bits on the side of that, coaching things, all those different sort of things. And suddenly I was just sat there and with nothing, no one, you know, nowhere to go. And I found that really, really difficult to deal with at the time. And I definitely didn't have the tools to sort of express to my friends and family like how I felt. And I was very sort of, I'm going to keep myself to myself. And actually that didn't help me at all. But I think it was at that point where I started thinking like, okay, like maybe this isn't like for you actually. Yeah. And I ended up taking a kind of step. I went to Australia to play a couple of months of rugby. Ended up staying there for about a year, and I was coaching a school. I was working at a cafe, like managing that in the mornings. I was training in the evenings. Their club rugby is not professional. And then I ended up getting a professional offer to come back to the UK. So that kind of reignited the sort of the dream a little bit. But I would say after that year where I hadn't had loads of fun, that was when I was sort of like, okay, let's be realistic now. Like you're 25, 26, like, you know, it's probably not going to happen. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And this opportunity to go to France came up, and I thought, okay, like even if this is terrible and you don't enjoy the rugby, you'll be learning French. You'll be advancing in some other respect. Wow. And I always felt like every year I was advancing in some respect. Yeah. Until the last year I was in France, and then I ended up. That was my last year of professional rugby. After that, the book was like, you know. When I grew up, I was very much like sport and books. I loved books. They were always my passion. I studied English literature. And I think when you're a reader, you kind of entertain the idea of like being an author. Yeah. And I was doing some work. I was doing some like freelance writing work, and I ended up sharing something on LinkedIn, which got me some like rugby blogging during one of the World Cups. Nice. And it was terrible pay, but it was like, it was a really good habit to get into because I was pitching stories into them, and they'd be like, yeah, sure, go and write it. Yeah, and I was building up those, but actually on the outside that, I was building up all these ideas that weren't appropriate for them because they were more like personally focused. Yeah. But as I would just note them down, sometimes I'd build them out a little bit just for practice, you know?
Yeah.
And then once those, they kind of got rolling, and then naturally this like idea for a book coalesced a little bit. So I started dabbling with it. And then I really hit a jumping off point where I was like, you've actually got a complete idea for this book. It wasn't written or anything, but you know how this book looks when it's finished now. Are you the person that does what they say they want? Like you tried to play rugby, like maybe didn't like get to where you'd like to have gone, but you still tried. And it's like, you've always said you wanted to write a book to yourself. And it's like, it's right here. You've got the time, you've got the idea, like, it's no one's stopping you. Mm-hmm. And I was like, who do you want to tell yourself you are?
Yeah.
And so I was like, right, I'm doing it. So I made this plan. I was like, I'll do 500 words a day.
Yeah.
Regardless of what else I'm doing.
Yeah.
So sometimes it'd be 1:45, I'd be, I haven't written. And I go and sit down and thrash them out. And even if they were terrible, it was just getting that, getting that practice in every single day, just
building that habit.
Exactly that. Yeah. And definitely my sporting mentalities were a big help with doing it, but that was it. And the reason I did it as well, it wasn't only like a long held ambition, but I was starting to build my career beyond sport. So I was like, okay, you need to demonstrate some capabilities. And a good way to do that is a bit like, we're sat here with this podcast, and it's like having work that you've done visible to people in the world. And I was like, this book will, even if it's like rubbish, will prove that you've got the that you can actually write long form, that you have the kind of tenacity to finish something, that you can produce a piece of work. And I self-published it because actually partly, I spoke to an agent. He was like, I think this is not going to go with a publisher. You're not a famous player, so the market tends to come out for big names. I think this is pretty good. You can definitely make it better, but I think this is a good route for you. And I was like, great. Because that meant that I got to kind of project manage it as well. So I was like, okay, I'm showcasing more skills. Yeah. This is another plus point of doing this.
I'd employ you.
You should, innit? Well.
Just based off of what you just said. And that's exactly how players need to leverage going beyond sports.
Yeah.
You need legible. You need to be legible in the world. People need to be able to understand your work. And unfortunately, particularly in a freelance, gig economy world, it's like you almost need to do the work twice. You need to do the work, and then you need to document that you've done the work.
That's what I'm saying. A lot of people, we live in an age where if they can't see it, you didn't do it. Even though, obviously a lot of people don't like to put themselves out there, different industries. But if you're not forefront on TikTok, for example, if you stop posting, for a week, your numbers will go down staggeringly. If we stopped releasing a podcast for a week or two, ever since we stopped for 3 months, numbers have not been the same. Yeah. So it's you can't afford to do that. But in terms of that branding, what you just said there, that's basically all the interview questions now. You've explained your competency for a role, these different skills you've developed. Now, if you asked a footballer that came through the academy system at Arsenal, what have you done beyond football? They don't have any tangible things that they can say. So now, when they get released, what are they going to say when they go into a job interview? And that was the position that I was in. When I left Barnsley, I'm going into an interview just saying, oh, well, you've got a lot of football experience, but how do I know you're going to be able to do this support worker job? You've never cared for anyone else. A simple, basic, entry-level job. But you couldn't still get that job because you don't have any transferable skills.
Yeah. I think the other way to look at it, because it is a burden to have to document your own work.
It is a big burden, a cost to carry.
But the positive way of looking at it is that it then works for you. So once you have stuff that's legible in the world, maybe online, maybe on LinkedIn, maybe on your social profiles, that actually works for you. And then if someone does ask you later, have you got evidence? You're like,
Yeah.
You send them the link
Send
to
them
your
the link.
post. There it
Yeah.
is. Like,
True,
you know,
true,
you can
true.
see this. So yeah, it is more work up front, but then it's work that can scale and work for you in the background, you know, and like some of the things I've done, you know, the books, like you say, the content stuff is like people have brought me opportunities I didn't realize existed. They're not things I applied for. You know, they're people just getting in touch. Oh, I saw this. You know, and that's actually led to some of the most fun work I've been doing over the last year with this like boys literacy project that I'm working on, which, you know, we could probably get onto later when we talk about books and stuff. But that was something that I didn't realize was a possibility. And actually it's been so rewarding. And it's just because I had stuff online.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I guess the words visible CV kind of screams out to me to say, I just look at you or look at your profile. It's a visible CV of, like you said, your competencies and what you can bring, but not just talk. It's actually actions.
Yeah.
You actually need to do something. But I think most people, when they leave football, they think it's going to be quite quick, you know, to really build that up and say, oh, 200 followers on 200,000 followers on TikTok. No problem. Give me 6 months?
Do you know how hard it is?
But this is the thing. I think documenting it like you guys do amazingly actually shows the steps that are needed. But I still feel like there's a disconnect between, oh, you just got here, I can just do what Ben's done. You know, so can you share maybe a little bit more on, I guess, that probably disconnect and the journey of getting to where you get to? Because all I see is you've written a couple books. I could do that in a couple of weeks, no?
I think it's so disrespectful.
It is very disrespectful. But if no one
disrespectful.
sticks some respect on some people's name
need to
in
put
terms
some
of what they're
respect,
doing,
man.
people will really never know the hard graft that you've put in and what it takes to be elite and to be excellent away from football, you know?
I suppose.
So before you get into that, I'm saying we just stand up and stretch because it's been like over an hour now. So you just give like 2 or 3 minutes, innit?
Yeah, calm.
Yeah.
I know
I'm hot too, man.
Yeah, calm.
a bit moving. I need to stretch.
I forgot my question.
Brilliant.
So yeah, thoughts?
Put some respect on his name after a little short break, obviously. Ad break.
Yeah, commercial break. No, I think I've not really found it like that. I think people are, because people find books like quite intimidating, I think. So people almost like, oh, I can't. It's almost the opposite. People are like, oh, I can't imagine doing that. And it's a bit like, well, when you break it down, a bit like your athletic practice, it's like, well, did you get to your sporting level in 6 months?
Yeah.
It's like, no.
Yeah.
But actually, a book is a project, right? And it's a project that has an end. So you can think, okay, very basic terms. If I'm going to write 100,000 words, if I write, 500 words a day, that's like 200 days of work. And it's like, okay, you can break it down like that. Maybe those won't be good. Maybe you'll have to do them again. Yeah. I think to your point, people maybe don't realize like the level of craft that the very best people are putting in. But again, it's like an athlete. So I think that the example I can always recall is Ernest Hemingway, who's like, an all-timer. I'm not claiming any kind of similar level of competency. Yeah. But he rewrote the ending to one of his novels 37 times.
Wow, yeah.
So just that last couple of pages, I think, or the last chapter, and you can see the manuscripts and things. So it's like all his like crossings out, all his like edits, all his alterations. He like 37 times just for the end. But yeah, it's the same as like a top athlete. I love the story about Dennis Bergkamp practicing free kicks, where he used to aim at specific bricks on the wall. Like he got so good, like outside his childhood home, that he would be like, right, I've got to hit that brick 10 times in a row, and it's similar. It's that practice over and over again and revising and doing things differently. So I think, anyone can start, anyone could start doing it. You could start writing things down, even 100 words a day, however much. But it's like that craft is like, one of the things that appeals to me about writing is that it could be a lifetime's improvement. Yeah. Sport, you're going to hit a peak, and you're going to start coming down the other side, right? I think that's just how it is. But I think with writing, one of the things that does appeal to me is like, oh, maybe I could always get better. I could spend the rest of my life getting better at doing it. And maybe I won't. Maybe I'll get bored. I don't know. Like that might happen. But I think one of the things that does appeal is like it doesn't have this like hard stop like sport does.
That's class.
I feel like, Dennis Bergkamp. I don't think a lot of young people know who he is.
Do you know who he is?
Yeah,
Yeah,
match
all
attacks.
right.
So I'm an Arsenal fan. I'm an Arsenal fan. I know I'm
Arsenal
dropping
fan.
all these like,
Yeah,
old
nah,
Arsenal guys.
I can tell.
Big
yeah,
legend, man. Dennis Bergkamp.
Yeah.
When match attacks. Used to be the legendary card, man.
Oh wow, right.
Yeah, back in the day. But I was saying, people don't respect what influencers put into it. I don't really think, normal people don't see it as a career or actually understand, you just make videos online. Yeah. A lot of people get laughed at.
I actually had a really interesting insight into that this year because, I'm now making TikTok content around books and I probably, try and post once a day. It is something I do. And if I'm around and about, I'll be documenting or whatever. But I went on a brand trip earlier this year and there's this Italian guy and I'd never heard of him, but he has 2 point something, maybe 2.3 or something like that million Instagram followers. And you could just see the level of commitment that he had. And I think it really suited his personality. So he was a curious person. He was spending the whole day where am I going to go next? Where am I going to go and get content? And he came home with video after video after video. And I was like, oh my God, this guy is way beyond me in terms of his commitment, output. I wouldn't say the quality was necessarily unapproachable. It wasn't like he was using any special equipment. It was all just his phone. He was just out there doing it, but he was totally committed. Every minute of his day, he was clearly thinking about it. And I just thought, wow, actually that is, you can look at someone's follower number and be like, oh, I wish, but to see him operate, that was
cost.
all that preoccupied him.
Yeah. It is I manage
So interesting.
my personal brand across all platforms. I manage Beyond Football across platforms and I manage F3 as well. So if you want to have it to a level and grow your following to something like 200K, 200,000 people engaged into your content and following you, what you post, it takes a lot of consistency, demand, engagement. One piece of content across all platforms it's very time consuming, appealing to these different markets, different types of posts. It's a profession that people don't understand or respect.
But throwing a spanner in the works, if you applied that to football, why doesn't it work? Because you're talking about dedication, commitment. That's what a lot of young people are saying. Let me give everything to football and I'm going to make it. 2 + 2 = 4. That's what we're saying. You need to put in work behind the scenes. So
it's a wicked environment. Football.
Yeah. I mean, nothing's certain. I think football, I sort of realised once I left sport, but getting into books as well, they're the same model. So it's a venture capital model. So venture capital companies will go and find, venture capital funds, they will go and find 100 businesses, 100 business ideas, 100 whatever they are, and they'll invest. They'll go, oh, here's £1 million. Go and grow your business. And actually, the way that model works is that one hit pays for everything. So they can afford for 99 of those 100 companies to fail if that one company goes sky high. And football's the same. In an academy, you got 100 kids. If one ends up in that Arsenal first team, it's a success because that kid, is priceless. Yeah. And actually, books are the same. So there's 100 books. A publisher will go, oh, here's a little bit of money for you. Here's a bit of money for you. They'll sort of wait and see what comes back, and they'll be like, okay. And then if one is a mega hit, it pays for everything else. Wow. So it's there are a lot of people who can stay in the game, keep making books, but actually the idea that you're all going to go huge is just a fallacy. But actually you realize a lot of the world runs on this model.
System,
yeah. That's so interesting. So even just backtracking then, I guess, what have you learnt from rugby, which has actually prepared you for this book game, as I would call it?
I think one of the things I was doing as well was sort of forcing myself out of my comfort zone. So when I was playing rugby, I didn't like social media. I didn't like I didn't realize how much of professional sport, is a sales pitch. You have to sell yourself, right?
Life is sales.
And I didn't realize. I just thought, if you turn up and play well and try hard and you're a good person and you don't, wind people up, people will You know, people will recruit you, of course. And then it's like, no, it doesn't work like that. You know, like if you're blindingly brilliant, then it probably will work like that. But if you're in the mix with everybody else, it's like going to need a little bit of something else. So I think the book, the first one in particular, really forced me to, you know, start asking people, you know, and being like, oh, look at this, or jumping into conversations online and being like, oh, I've actually just written a book about this exact topic, you know, would you like a copy? Sending it out.
Exactly what happened.
Exactly.
That's exactly what happened in the group chat.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, that's what you got to do. And actually, then when people got in touch and they were like, oh, I really enjoyed it. I remember the first time I asked for a review on Amazon, because I know how powerful those are for the algorithm. The first time I was like, oh my God, I should ask for a review. I really don't want to. Oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Yeah. And I felt really greasy about doing it. But then, you know, now I'm ruthless. You know, if someone's like, oh, I enjoyed it, I was like, oh yeah, leave me a review. Thanks so much. You know, like, and, you know, getting a chat about it. But it's just how the world turns, and you've got to get over. I think part of it is an ego thing, that you shouldn't have to make obvious effort. You shouldn't have to sell yourself. And it's like, actually almost everybody does, and that's fine. It's actually fine. And, you know, you don't have to be like unpleasant. I think stating things you've done is fine, you know, but I always felt uncomfortable about it because it feels.
I think that's the world of sport, though, in terms of we're always told to not get big time, not get complacent. They don't have enough time to focus on their previous successes. You know, a lot of footballers say their careers, they don't really have any time. They just brush it. Ronaldo, he just brushes it onto the next Ballon d'Or, stuff like that. I think that's just the culture in sports. Like, we don't really celebrate it, and we do celebrate it, but not to the extent that maybe other industries, or even just life in general.
I think particularly with team sport, I mean, rugby always definitely had a very like team first, no one's above the team, you know, what are you doing? If you put, you know, sort of say things, put your head above the parapet. It was, and it's still, that pertains still. And it was funny, I was watching, I don't know if you've seen it, Sprint on Netflix.
Oh, I watched that in one sitting. Amazing.
So
good.
Track and Fits,
Track and Field.
Yeah. It's about 100.
Track and Fits, that company we met at the Black and Sport. Yeah, they're in that. You know.
Oh, nice. Yeah, they had Noah Lyles, right?
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, I don't know. It doesn't feel like some of his like self-aggrandizing doesn't feel like it comes naturally.
Yeah.
And I was sat there like, oh, I feel a bit awkward.
Yes,
and then I was like, he's literally the fastest man in the world. So I was like, well, he's perfectly entitled to go, I'm the fastest man in the world. You've all got to show up and beat me, you know, that's perfectly fine. But, you know, I still felt this like resistance to it. But they are in a solo game, those guys, you know, it's different.
100%. But I think that's what, with the sprint, I loved it. Like seeing behind the scenes and different things. But we went to an event and I remember speaking about track and field, and they were just like, there's no money in it to take it to the next level like a football or NFL, because there's no eyes. You know, we talk about bums and eyes, you know, people on seats that are paying money and people that are watching it, that's actually going to generate interest. But I think you have to sell yourself, or how else are people going to know about you? You know, and I've been saying it, and I love working with Daniel, because he's just in a different generation to me. I know I look younger than him, but he's in because this younger generation, they're happy to be out here selling themselves. And I don't even think people are doing anything special sometimes, but they will shout from the rooftops about it. And I know so many great people that are older than me, like people that are mentors, that they've probably done amazing work, but just nobody knows about it. And I'm like, these lot are so much better, but they're just not visible. People just don't know about their work. And I think we're moving into a society where if no one knows about you, you're not going to get anything.
You're not going to eat.
How are you going to eat?
You're not going to eat.
Because nobody knows the value that you bring.
100%.
So it's quite interesting.
I think like the track and field thing, I think it was in the last Olympics. She's called Sydney McLaughlin. I think she's
Sydney,
400 meter hurdler, I think. And she's like, you know, she broke the world record. She won Olympic gold. And she gave the driest post-race interview, you know, nothing. It was stone-faced, like, And Michael Johnson on coverage said afterwards, he was like, she's saving the good stuff for her Instagram. And I was like, that is super interesting. Because it was like,
she posts quite a lot.
And it was like, oh, she knows where the value is. And the value is not, you know, kind of in a way performing for the rights holder. The value is performing on her channel and getting people invested in her. And I was like, wow, that is incredible that that's like a public conversation. And I think it's something that people are going to have to, you know, maybe integrate better actually, and let the athlete and the rights holder kind of interact like in a way that benefits both, because otherwise people will do more of that. And
It's Ben Foster.
yeah,
He's absolutely changed the game. I think he's the best example of the Beyond Football podcast. He's the inspiration for obviously what I'd done in terms of creating my YouTube channel and my podcast, because I started, I think 6 months after he started his YouTube channel and podcast, because I'm a goalkeeper. He's played for Man United, same position. He started his own podcast, GoPros in
he
the
started
goal.
with cycling, didn't he? Wasn't
Cycling
that
GK, yeah. So that's his identity. That's his secure base beyond football.
Yeah.
But I was like, I wanted to call my channel because obviously I was studying psychology as well. I was going to call my YouTube channel the footballer psychologist or something like that, using the same terminology. But you know, some of my friends, they said, no, just call it Daniel Jinadu. But he did something that's completely history making in terms of changing the game. He speaks about, like, I love the way he thinks, man. He speaks about on his podcast saying that when he signs for Wrexham, he's not gonna do any like interview. He's gonna do a YouTube video announcing it, really having players taking a hold of their media presence, personality, stories. He's basically created a biography of himself through his YouTube channel, through his podcast, where he's saying these are the best moments, these are the people I've played against. This is how my football career has impacted me. These are the best stories on his Instagram. You know, all the latest news from that. This is an insight into my life behind the baller of the person who's played in the Premier League multiple years. And I think that's where it's going in terms of personal branding. The name of the game is personal branding now. If you don't have that credibility and that social proof online, a lot of companies are not going to employ you. Because LinkedIn they don't really ask for your CV anymore, they ask for your LinkedIn. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile that's established, that's reputable, then they're not really going to employ you. It's the same with football clubs now. I think like it's unconsciously, but the number of following you have on Instagram can influence your contract.
Wow.
When you sign for a club, yeah. Ronaldo, when he signs for Man United, that's part of his media deal.
I think it's an asset that you have,
That's
right?
it.
And it's like you say, it's another like it's another arrow in your quiver, right? Like so when you sign for a team, it's like, okay, well, this is part of my image rights. This is part of, like, you know, what I can bring to your organisation. I think Ben Foster, he obviously has bosses who have built what they've built on the back of like their personalities as well. So they obviously get it and they understand that, you know, what's good for Ben Foster is good for Wrexham.
them,
100%.
That's why it worked. Oh, absolutely amazingly.
Yeah.
They've probably made millions from that now, right?
Oh yeah.
100%.
In terms of the scope, the opportunity, I feel like he's the blueprint that I follow in terms of the Fozcast. Obviously, they're sponsored by Spotify now. They've got their own studio, all these different things. He does everything. He's one of the guys where he just records everything, posts it, links it to football, and then a real role model in the society. I know we've touched on these different your football, your rugby experience, the books, and these different things. Obviously, social media, and how it really is. But I wanted to obviously have this last segment all focused about, like, who are you beyond rugby, and, you know, some of like your hardest periods during your rugby career and how you overcame them.
Yeah, I think I'm not really sure like where I want to go, but I think who I am generally is a storyteller. I think I've always been someone who thrives telling stories. I was always someone, when I think about it, I like being picked on to read in class, and I was always someone who loved like going, oh yeah, come listen, and like telling stories in the team environment. And now I tell them, you know, in books and online. And I think that is like who I am actually. I think that is what lights me up, and sharing stories, telling them, listening to them, learning about other people. I think that curiosity is probably like who I am. And I think that did inform a lot of my rugby. I think I grew up in Bath, and it's a small place, and it's lovely, it's beautiful, you know, had a like largely really nice upbringing. My parents got divorced when I was doing my GCSE exams, I suppose, or in that kind of time period. So that was quite difficult. That was like, that's a sort of relatively common experience for people, I think, their parents getting divorced. But that was very difficult, and kind of quite quickly, our dynamic changing in our family, and having to become quite responsible quite quickly for my siblings. I was the eldest. But I think growing up in Bath, it was very small, and by the time you're 18, you've sort of met everybody. And I had these intellectual curiosities about books and learning and studying, and also about the world. Like, I wanted to see more of the world. So I think I was never set on staying in Bath for the long term. I always wanted to leave. I went to university in Newcastle, which is the other end of the country. I really liked the place when I visited. I was like, what a, amazing environment. I loved like meeting the real, the people who live there, like having that university experience, but also playing like club rugby and meeting the guys who are like from the area. It was this like old school, like proper, like northern men's rugby club, which was really great because has these like sort of posh students from the university coming and playing with them. We had this really good like really fun environment, like mix of personalities and stuff. And then I think like France was a little bit like that as well. I always like France has a huge rugby culture. They have this very like passionate connection to the sport and to their town and where they're from. They call it l'esprit de cloche, which is the like spirit of the clock tower. So the clock tower would be like, where the town gathers around. So that spirit like informs you in a home game. That's what you draw on. It's like, we're defending our town.
Yeah, wow.
So French teams don't expect to win away from home, which is a hilarious mentality, because they're just like, no, obviously, like they'll be way more motivated.
Yeah.
We're just kind of here. And that was one of the things we had to like try and break down. But yeah, I think I just always had this like outward curiosity about the world. And then I think sport was like what let me explore that in myself, like my physical capacities, capabilities, and and then in a team environment, like what we're capable of together. But I think books let me explore when I was just sat in the house, or on a bus, and it was like, I can learn what it's like to grow up somewhere totally different. I can learn what it's like in a different period of history. I can learn what it's like to be a totally different person. And I think that curiosity is still what kind of keeps me interested. I love hearing different stories and exploring different perspectives and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think those are the things that like move me forward.
And then that's who you are. And then some of like, how did you get through some of your most difficult experience, or before that, what are some of the most difficult experiences that a rugby player experiences during their career?
I think like I got lucky. I never got really badly hurt, and I think part of that was because I was always big on my physical preparation. I was always pretty fit. I was always like very strong in the gym, but I was always working my flexibility. I was always going swimming for recovery and saunas and that sort of stuff. I loved all that, yoga. I was always interested in that, and I think there were certain times I can think where I maybe caught a stud and I managed to get my foot out, or where I avoided quite a serious injury because of the work that I'd done. So I found that prevention is, what is it?
Better than
cure. Yeah, exactly. In that respect, I think that the toughest bit was definitely when I was in my mid-20s and I didn't have a contract. And I think when you think now, you're like, that's what depression is.
Yeah.
I was depressed. Wow. And I think it took me a while to realize the solution, and the solution was to change my environment. I went away. I had to do that myself. I was like, right, enough's enough. Like these things, what you're saying earlier, a lot of sport is out of your control.
Yeah.
So these things are not in my control, but what can I do? What possibilities are open to me? And okay, you've got these possibilities. Like, what do you want to do? And I was like, okay, I'm going to go here. I'm going to stay with my mate. I'm going to go to Australia, do this. And then doing that, I learned all these other skills. I learned there is a life outside sport that's quite fun. There were these possibilities to maybe stay in Australia, maybe teach at a school, do these other things. And I was like, oh, wow, like I'm interested in making coffee in cafes, in business, in coaching, in working with young people, all these other things I learned about myself in that time. And I was like, oh, okay, you can cobble together, you know, things to do. And like the way I got out of that rut was definitely just by doing what I could do in that moment. Okay, what are your options? And I think beyond sport, like once I stopped playing rugby, after I'd left France, come back to the UK, and I spent a year trying different jobs. I had some savings. I was like, I don't need to commit to anything. I'm lucky. I don't need to like immediately make a load of money. I'm like, I've got the chance to like maybe build a life that I like living rather than, you know, having too much pressure on me. And I was, after a while, I was like, oh, nothing's quite taken hold for me yet. And I'm not quite sure. I went and did some work at a sports content place, and they're great clients, and the people were pretty nice, and they wanted me to stay, and talking about, you know, like permanent employment there. But I hadn't like loved the little bit of work I'd done there. And I was like, unless you do something else, unless you make yourself stand out, unless you force yourself out of your current sort of environment, like I did in Sydney, but that was like a physical environmental move. And this was a sort of reputational move, or a kind of
Personal brand.
It was, but it was a sort of perception. Unless you change the public perception of yourself, like this is where you are, like this is what's available to you. And I was like, okay, like that's all right, but it's not what I want. So I was like, you've got this book thing, like just go at it, commit to it. And then actually, the more that I shared, the more work I made, the more I shared, I ended up with this role at Laps. I made a kind of content project that's still on my website, and it's underneath the Endgame book. There's a load of interviews I did with former teammates about their life beyond sport. I saw Laps had an opportunity come up, and I applied, and we had a chat, but they were like, oh, you're not actually, we don't think this role is for you, but actually we would love you to be our head of content. So I ended up in this other environment where, you know, it sounds similar to what you're doing with the podcast. It was like you're responsible for all these different content streams that they have. And so I learned a lot in that role as well. So those things came to me because I just changed, you know, I changed the sort of perception, both like internally, but also externally of who I was. And I think those were the two bits in life that have been difficult, you know, I think for me. But with the first book, it was also like, I think if you're working with a traditional publisher, you've got people like gassing you up, you know, people are like, yeah, brilliant. Whereas if you're just doing something on your own, people are like a little bit like, oh, okay, you know, and you need that like bloody mindedness. You need that athletic, like grit, determination to be like, no, I'm going to see this through, like through hell or high water kind of thing. Right. And I think that was a good lesson as well. It was like, ignore external voices in that respect. If there's something you want to do, like, it's actually almost better if no one encourages you. You learn more about yourself.
Intrinsic. But Reese Barra, he always puts something that I love in terms of when you start to believe your own hype, you're finished.
Yeah.
Never believe your own hype, because that's when you start getting complacent. So obviously
on that sprint documentary, they had Zarnell Hughes, and they had him meet Linford Christie, and Linford Christie is like, train like a contender, even when you're a champion.
That's it. Yeah,
that was class.
That's the mentality of greatness. You can't ever believe your own hype. When people are saying, "Oh, your book is amazing," I think this is the best book I've ever read.
Thank you.
If it's it is. You can say thank you, but once it starts sinking in internally and your head starts swelling, that swell is hard to.
Yeah, someone said once, never get to a place where you think you've arrived, and never get to a place where you can't be taught and you'll be all right.
Have you trademarked that one?
I haven't yet.
I've already
might take that one.
I wrote it down.
Publish that
one. But yeah, no, it's.
But it's amazing. Like, so many gems have been dropped here, man. But it's so interesting to obviously get insight into other sport and the ways that it obviously aligns, and it's just so interesting. Sport is the way for life, isn't it?
It is.
I know you mentioned a lot previously about sport. Football teaches you everything.
It does.
Sport teaches you everything about your foundations in life, and it's, you know, in the olden days, the Olympics, all these different things, these are foundational things of society So it's just about navigating it correctly and utilizing the opportunity. Nice.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff is probably going back to the quote that I said, people operate at the level of their wisdom. I think first we need to teach people how to think. And I think that's what's probably lacking. That footballers aren't taught how to think. They're just told what to do. Because when you actually start to think through things, then you can actually, like you said, in the midst of not having a contract or being injured, you change your perception and your perspective, and that actually changes the course of your life. When you were talking about you didn't have a club, you sat there probably in a room by yourself with your thoughts. And I'm always like, was that voluntary or involuntary? More time than not, it's involuntary. You wouldn't have written that as part of your story. You probably would have gone on to be the best rugby player if you were to write a tale about what I wanted to be when you were 6. But the reality is that doesn't happen. So when you actually know how to think, you can reprogram the way that you think to reprogram the direction of your life.
But
And
how
I
do you
think
know how to think?
this is what I
$1
always
million question.
this is what I'm always saying, that it's great to have us sit here, but how do you put that into the mind of a 7-year-old? I'm always like, I'd love to cut your head open, put this information in so you can live the life, but that's just not life. And I think that's why we need to be more vocal about these different things so that we can help people have a choice to think a different way.
I haven't quite squared how to do this yet, but I think stories are vehicles for lessons, right? You know, myths are our oldest stories, and quite often they're vehicles for lessons, for wisdom, for models, for ways to think. And actually, I wonder if what you're saying requires stories, and not just even necessarily like a true story, but maybe almost like a fable, you know, like, you know, some sort of delivery vehicle for
Would
this.
you ever do that in terms of turning Endgame into like a children's book?
I would really think, and Fringes in particular, I've thought about, you know, could I slice that up into some different
with
like
pictures
fictional
and
stories?
animations and that.
Yeah.
That'd be sick. Yeah.
I've got something, I need to like revise it again, but I've written a little fable about like, it's not sport related, unfortunately, but about like facing your fears. And I think that sort of fable format is super interesting for me. But I wonder if what you're saying, it requires, and people learn in different ways as well. So, you know, that people need these lessons in various forms, but whether there's a way of kind of almost having a sort of athlete curriculum, I don't know, but you know, it's definitely
That's so interesting what you just said. Like, the scope of books is crazy. There's going to be talking books with AI, books with
Is that not a movie?
access to a lot of things. Like Diary of a CEO is talking. He has a talking diary, right?
So one of the things, there's audiobooks, but one of the things I've tried to do with Endgame is you can turn a book into a chatbot, into a GPT on ChatGPT. So I uploaded the whole text of Endgame,
Game changer.
and then I was trying to train it to make it conversational. So it could be, if you're an athlete, you could come to the bot and you could be like, you know, it could prompt you, and you could say, okay, I'm thinking about these things, these are my interests, and it could almost talk you through a few like ways that you could maybe go about thinking, maybe have some next steps. But I wasn't that good at like the training of it. But I think that is a possibility that people would be able to like take a book and like use it. I've seen someone do it, and I don't listen to this podcast, but I've seen someone do it with the Andrew Huberman one. It's all about health, and you can almost search
Huberman Lab.
Yeah, you can almost search all the podcasts, and it will come up with transcripts and then the attached clip. So it's like
on ChatGPT.
It's I can't remember exactly what the site is, but it's like, tell me about how to, you know, or like, I want to optimize
like your neuroscience,
or whatever it is, and it will come up with the appropriate clips on the podcast. But because that's also another way, like with you guys, you know, with this, it's like you've got a body of work, but the AI will let you reference it. Because at the minute, that referencing of it's quite hard. You know?
Time consuming.
Exactly. But I have dabbled in that a little bit, and I am super interested in how people will go about that. So if anyone knows, then
I got you. Obviously, closing off now, we just wanted to obviously see advice for, you know, aspiring athletes, rugby players, their parents, the people supporting them. Like, what advice would you give to young athletes who are just starting their professional careers?
enjoy yourself. I think explore yourself, explore the limit of who you are and what you can do, and don't confine that to the sports field. You know, do everything you can on there and you'll have the best time, but also explore who you are elsewhere, push yourself in some other domains, and you'll realize just how many transferable skills, just how talented you are, not only on a track, on a pitch, but in the broader world. There's a great quote, again, I'm going to claim credit. It's actually, no, it's a guy, he said, sport is a temporary stage for your permanent purpose. It's a guy who wrote the laps, called Derek.
Wow.
Yeah,
I think that's the best one.
Has he trademarked? Has he trademarked
Oh my gosh, that's going on the website. I'm sending that to Josh now. Josh Staples is coming your way.
But
wow, that's amazing.
So it's, and you know, sport, it can only be a certain section of your life. That's how it is. But that's also the beauty of it, that it will finish and you'll be able to look back on it, with, hopefully with fondness, to do everything you can to do that.
That's so good.
And how can parents and coaches support athletes in preparing for life beyond sports?
I think to keep that broad vision, keep the end in mind. So if you want to buy my book Endgame, but there are common challenges for athletes across sport, you know, across all types of background and person. So there are common challenges for athletes finishing sports. So, you know, those are financial challenges, they're personal challenges, they're challenges in relationships. These things, challenges with your purpose, your sense of purpose and worth. These are common across athletes, regardless of like how high they achieve, how low, you know, even if they don't achieve, even if they drop out, these are common things that happen. So as someone supporting an athlete, support the whole person, support that whole person, not just the athlete, because a better person, a more secure person with a base for the foundation, a more capable person will make a better athlete. So
that's good.
That's what I'd say.
Got to wrap it up soonish. Last question.
Go on.
You?
No, go on.
Number 3, what resources or support system do you think are essential for athletes during and after their careers? Endgame, obviously.
Yeah,
That's the main one.
I think the thing with Endgame, my book, is what's good about it is it sort of explains some of these ways of thinking like we were talking about, rather than this is exactly what you should do. The whole thing won't be applicable to you and your situation, but that you will definitely find something. And I think athletes have support systems in their sporting environment, right? They've got a physio, they've got maybe have psychologists, they've got teammates, they've got fans, they've got coaches, managers, whoever. Think about who these people are, who fulfills these roles for you outside of sport. So it's like, okay, who is your support system away from the field? People who have nothing to do with sport. Who are your friends who aren't your teammates? You know, who are your therapists who aren't your physios? You know, who are these people that provide those different supports for you away from sport, and build that for yourself before you need it.
Yeah,
before you need it.
That's perfect, man. Well, it's been a pleasure, man. I think
amazing.
That's one of the best episodes. Every time it's the best episode. Every week.
Oh, don't say that.
That's
I have to
top.
come back.
We're going to come back 100%. But I wanted to obviously, we recently launched our website, beyondfootball.uk, and we wanted to celebrate by having some merchandise. So this is the Beyond Football 100% cotton BMP top. It stands for beneficial, necessary and possible. To go beyond sports, to go beyond rugby, to go beyond football and be more than a footballer. It is beneficial. It's necessary and it's possible. So if you want to join us on the journey, I think these are currently sold out, but you've got another batch coming through. Check out the website, go on there, and if you want a 20% discount, use the code #BeyondFootball. And also, if Ben will allow, if you guys want to check out Endgame and want a discount on that, use #BeyondFootball as well. We don't know what the discount will be, but obviously we'll leave it in the description down below. But Ben, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man.
It's been amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had such a great time. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. And maybe I'll come back.
That's it.
100%.
Let's go. Beyond Football to the world and back.
That's it.
Today I'm going to pitch Beyond Football to the Haberdashers. So wish me luck, man. Hoping to obviously take us international and bigger and better. So
Amen.
Till next time. See you guys.